Imagine a world not so long ago where whispers of other histories, other prophecies filled the air. These weren't just stories, they were once sacred texts, revered by communities, offering different lenses through which to view divine truth. They circulated widely, shaping the beliefs of countless individuals, yet today, most people have never even heard their names. These ancient writings offer alternative perspectives on events we think we understand, challenging our preconceived notions of sacred history. They present a different spiritual landscape, a more complex tapestry of belief than the one we typically envision. What if the stories we've been told are just one thread in a much larger, more intricate weave? For centuries, these documents were considered vital, their wisdom deeply impactful. But then, something shifted, and they vanished, pushed into the shadows, deemed too dangerous or perhaps too revealing for common consumption. This sudden disappearance leaves us with a profound question. What did these lost texts contain that necessitated their removal from the mainstream? It's a question that leads us directly into a Messiah nothing like the one most of us imagine. And real quick, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more videos. Now let's get started. When we speak of the Messiah, a singular image usually comes to mind. A figure of peace, humility, and boundless compassion. This Messiah is often associated with healing the sick and turning the other cheek, embodying a gentle and merciful spirit. We envision a leader whose power lies in love and sacrifice rather than earthly dominion. Yet, some of these forgotten texts paint a radically different portrait, one that might shock and even disturb our modern sensibilities. They describe a Messiah not primarily focused on universal love, but on an uncompromising vision of divine justice. This figure isn't meek or mild. Instead, they are characterized by an intense zeal, a fiery determination to cleanse and to rule. The role of this Messiah is not simply to redeem, but to fundamentally reshape the world through a powerful, almost violent, intervention. This is a messianic figure who rides not on a donkey, but on a war horse, ready to enact divine vengeance against all perceived enemies. It's a striking contrast that demands we examine the concept of justice over mercy, which we'll explore next. In today's spiritual discourse, mercy often takes precedence, seen as the ultimate expression of divine love and understanding. We are taught to forgive, to extend grace, and to err on the side of compassion, believing that these qualities reflect the highest moral standards. This emphasis on mercy colors our understanding of many religious narratives, making us prefer stories of redemption over retribution. However, some ancient traditions, particularly those reflected in the lost texts, prioritized an unyielding standard of justice. For them, true righteousness demanded that every transgression be met with appropriate consequence, that cosmic balance be restored through strict adherence to divine law. There was a belief that overlooking sin or undue leniency would compromise the very fabric of holiness. This perspective reveals a world where justice is not merely punitive, but a necessary act of purification, essential for maintaining order in a chaotic world. It's a vision where the scales must always be perfectly balanced, even if it means harsh judgment. And this relentless pursuit of justice found its most potent target in Rome, which these texts depict as a blood-stained beast. For the communities who cherished these lost texts, Rome was not merely a powerful empire, it was a living, breathing embodiment of oppression and wickedness. They saw its vast armies, its opulent cities, and its brutal dominion not as symbols of civilization, but as evidence of profound evil. Rome was the ultimate antagonist, a force actively working against divine will. Its legions marched across conquered lands, leaving behind a trail of devastation and subjugation, which these writers passionately condemned. The gladiator games, the public executions, the forced religious conformity all solidified Rome's image as a heartless, bloodthirsty power. It was a beast devouring the world, corrupting everything it touched. This perception wasn't just political dissent, it was deeply theological. Rome represented the anti-God empire, a dominion built on pride, idolatry, and the trampling of sacred laws. This fueled an intense desire for divine intervention, a desperate hope that God would finally unleash his wrath upon this blood-stained beast. And it wasn't just political powers that faced condemnation. Even the very priesthood was implicated, as we'll uncover next. Within the pages of these forgotten scriptures, a startling critique emerges, not only of foreign oppressors, but also of the very religious establishment of the time. The Jewish priesthood, traditionally seen as intermediaries between God and humanity, comes under severe scrutiny. These texts accuse them of corruption, worldliness, and a grievous departure from true piety. The writers believed that the priests had compromised their sacred duty, growing too comfortable with Roman rule, too eager for personal gain, and too lax in upholding divine law. They saw the temple, once a beacon of spiritual purity, as having become defiled by rituals performed without sincere devotion. The gold, the vestments, the sacrifices, all were tainted by hypocrisy and self-interest. This was not a minor disagreement, it was a profound crisis of faith. If the very leaders meant to guide the people to God were themselves lost, then where could true holiness be found? It painted a picture of a spiritual desert, devoid of authentic leadership, paving the way for an untamed vision of holiness that challenged all existing norms. With the conventional priesthood deemed corrupt, the lost texts looked for holiness not in established institutions, but in radical, uncompromising purity. This was a vision of holiness that refused to be contained by temple walls or hierarchical structures. It demanded complete separation from worldly compromises and absolute devotion to divine law above all else. This untamed holiness was often found in wilderness communities, far from the perceived corruption of cities and temples. Here, adherents sought to live lives of ascetic rigor, constant prayer, and diligent study of Scripture. They believed that genuine piety required a total rejection of the impurities of the world, even if it meant living on the fringes of society. This was a fierce, almost raw, understanding of sacredness, where proximity to God meant absolute moral cleanliness and adherence to a strict code. It was a call to an extreme form of spiritual living, one that saw no middle ground between light and darkness. And this intense pursuit of purity informed their belief in earth's purge before heaven's reign. The idea of divine judgment, a cleansing fire to purify the world, is a recurring theme across many ancient traditions. But in these lost texts, this concept takes on an especially vivid and uncompromising form. They describe not a gentle transition, but a cataclysmic upheaval, a literal purging of the earth to prepare for a new, perfected era. This purge is depicted as a time of immense destructive power, where all wickedness and corruption will be utterly eradicated. It's not just about punishing the evil, it's about making the planet suitable for the direct reign of a holy God. The earth itself must be scoured clean, its blemishes removed through divine intervention. This vision was born from a deep longing for ultimate justice, believing that only through such a drastic cleansing could true righteousness prevail. It was a stark warning, but also a fervent hope for a world reborn. And in this dramatic cosmic drama, angels played a surprising role, acting as enforcers, not comforters. When we typically think of angels, images of benevolent guardians, messengers of peace, and comforting presences often come to mind. They are seen as celestial beings dedicated to protecting humanity and delivering divine blessings. This gentle portrayal shapes our understanding of their role in the heavenly hosts. However, the lost texts reveal a more formidable, even terrifying, aspect of angelic beings. Here, angels are depicted not primarily as comforters, but as fierce enforcers of divine judgment and cosmic law. They wield swords of fire, execute God's wrath, and oversee the destruction of the wicked, rather than offering solace. These are angels of war and retribution, agents of a stern and unwavering justice. Their presence signals not comfort, but the imminent unfolding of divine decree, often with cataclysmic consequences for those found wanting. This rigorous perspective instilled the fear of the Lord amplified, a theme we will turn to next. The concept of the fear of the Lord is present in canonical scriptures, often understood as a profound reverence and awe for God's power. It's typically interpreted as a respectful acknowledgement of divine majesty, leading to wisdom and obedience rather than terror. This respectful awe guides believers toward righteous living. However, the lost texts elevate this concept to an intense level, where the fear of the Lord is not just reverence, but a palpable, holy dread. It emphasizes God's absolute power and unyielding justice in a way that evokes genuine apprehension of divine wrath. Transgression is met with swift, uncompromising judgment, making the consequences intensely real. This amplified fear serves as a potent motivator, demanding meticulous adherence to every divine command. It paints a picture of a God whose holiness is so absolute that any impurity in his presence is simply annihilated. This unblinking focus on divine judgment was deeply intertwined with the hope that the exiled God would one day return to Zion. Many ancient traditions speak of God's presence among his people, often localized in sacred spaces. But for the communities associated with these lost texts, there was a profound sense of God's absence, a feeling that divine glory had, in a way, departed from the temple and from Zion itself due to human sinfulness. This perceived exile weighed heavily on their hearts. They yearned for a day when God would not merely visit, but truly establish his permanent dwelling amidst his chosen city once more. This wasn't just a metaphor. It was a literal, physical return of divine presence, an event that would dramatically transform the very landscape of Zion. It meant the eradication of all defilement and the establishment of a perfectly holy realm. This expectation fueled an intense longing for a new, unimpeachable covenant and a rebuilt, purified Jerusalem. It was the ultimate restoration, a return to an Eden-like state where God's glory was fully manifest on earth. This hope was not extended to everyone. It envisioned a different class of the chosen, which we explore next. The idea of chosen people is deeply embedded in Abrahamic faiths, often referring to a specific lineage or nation set apart by God. This election usually implies a covenant relationship, with both responsibilities and blessings. It's normally understood as a broad identity encompassing an entire community. However, within the lost texts, the concept of being chosen becomes far narrower, almost exclusive. It refers not just to an entire nation, but to a very specific, purified remnant, a select group distinguished by their unparalleled righteousness and unwavering commitment to divine law. These are the truly elect, the few who remain unsullied in a corrupt world. This elite class saw themselves as the spiritual vanguard, the true inheritors of God's promises, having endured persecution and maintained their purity amidst widespread apostasy. They were distinct from the broader population, believing their strict adherence to an uncompromising vision of holiness made them uniquely worthy. And this discerning perspective found hidden meanings even in familiar scriptures, turning the Psalms into apocalyptic code. The Psalms are generally cherished for their poetic beauty, their profound expressions of worship, lament, and praise. They offer comfort and inspiration, a wellspring of personal devotion and communal reflection. We read them for solace, guidance, and emotional resonance. Yet, for the communities that preserved the lost texts, the Psalms held a deeper, more urgent meaning. They weren't just ancient poems. They were seen as prophetic blueprints, filled with hidden messages about the end times, cosmic battles, and the dramatic judgment to come. Every verse contained layers of apocalyptic significance, waiting to be deciphered. These interpreters believed that the psalmist's words, when read through the lens of heightened expectation and divine retribution, revealed the precise unfolding of God's plan for the world's dramatic conclusion. The lamentations became cries for imminent vindication, the praises, anticipations of a holy reign. This specific reading highlighted fierce competing visions of the Messiah. Our modern understanding of the Messiah often consolidates various ancient prophecies and expectations into a single, cohesive figure. We tend to harmonize different scriptural passages, creating a unified theological portrait that emphasizes universal love and spiritual salvation. This integrated view simplifies a complex historical landscape of belief. However, the reality of ancient messianic expectation was far more fractured and diverse. The lost texts reveal not one, but multiple, often conflicting, visions of who the Messiah would be and what he would accomplish. Some awaited a kingly warrior, others a priestly figure, and still others a prophetic teacher endowed with divine wisdom. These different messianic concepts were not minor variations. They represented fundamentally different hopes for redemption and deliverance. They reflected the diverse spiritual longings and political realities of disparate groups, each striving to understand God's plan for their future. This diversity ultimately led to intense canon politics and theological erasure. The formation of any sacred canon is never a purely theological exercise. It is deeply intertwined with power, politics, and the consolidation of authority. The decision of which texts to include and which to exclude shapes the very foundation of a religion, influencing doctrine, worship, and ethical norms for generations. This process is far from neutral. In the early centuries, as nascent religious traditions sought to define themselves, fierce debates raged over textual legitimacy. Groups vied for their preferred scriptures to be recognized as divinely inspired, while others were deliberately suppressed or rejected. This wasn't just about truth, it was about establishing a normative narrative. The exclusion of certain texts was a powerful act of theological erasure, effectively silencing alternative voices and perspectives. The ideas contained within these forgotten writings were deemed incompatible with the emerging consensus, threatening the established order or presenting truths that were inconvenient. This deliberate exclusion begs the question: what we lost with their exclusion? The removal of these texts from the mainstream religious narrative was more than just a historical footnote. It profoundly shaped the theological landscape, funneling human understanding of the divine into narrower channels. We lost access to a rich tapestry of thought, to alternative interpretations that could have offered a more complex and nuanced view of faith. Imagine what these banished scriptures might have contributed to our understanding of justice, mercy, and the nature of God's intervention in the world. They contained unique perspectives on spiritual warfare, the role of angelic beings, and the very unfolding of cosmic history. Their absence impoverished the intellectual and spiritual treasury. This erasure created gaps in our collective memory, leaving us with a less complete picture of ancient religious belief and the dynamic struggles that defined it. We were left with carefully curated narratives, often stripped of their challenging edges. Thus, the urgent task remains to consider reclaiming a silenced vision. The journey through these lost texts reveals a different world, where prophets spoke with burning intensity, angels waged heavenly wars, and the Messiah was seen through a lens of unyielding justice. Their suppression was not an accident, it was a deliberate act of theological shaping, designed to present a particular vision of truth. But these whispers from the past refuse to be completely silenced. Reclaiming these forgotten narratives isn't about replacing established beliefs, but about enriching them, about understanding the vibrant, sometimes turbulent, currents that shaped ancient faith. It's an invitation to broaden our spiritual imagination, to see the divine through eyes that once held a different, more challenging perspective. It asks us to confront the uncomfortable truths that were once deemed too dangerous to circulate widely. By bringing these texts back into conversation, we don't just recover ancient words, we recover a fuller, more complex picture of religious history and human belief. We acknowledge the deliberate choices that shaped our canons and dare to question why certain visions were pushed into the shadows. This act of recovery allows us to revisit the challenging questions they posed and to ponder the profound insights they offered. Make sure to subscribe for more religious videos and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new video. We'll see you in the next one.